Bobby Broyles and Tim McDonald here. Should be a really interesting matchup. Buckle up. If you're not watching, you got some problems.
Through 3 weeks in 2016, and the standings are already starting to take shape in a way few predicted. I'm Bobby Broyles alongside Tim McDonald. And yes, I know it's early, but welcome into This Week in CA Football presented by Geico. Headlines from the weekend include Stony Brook's impressive win at home over Richmond, and the Great Danes improving to 3-0 on the young season.
I mean, it immediately jumped out to me. You had to start in Long Island with Stony Brook. Not only did Stony Brook win, but just in a dominating fashion, 42-14 over then number 2 Richmond. I thought Stony Brook could compete, and I thought Stony Brook had a chance in that game, but I didn't see that margin of victory. First win over a top 5 foe all time. First win over Richmond, and the highest ranked opponent Stony Brook has ever beaten. I mean, 48 rush attempts for Stony Brook, 221 yards. Stacey Bedell only had 100 yards, but he scored 4 touchdowns. 3 interceptions off Kyle Oletta, 32 total rush yards allowed to Richmond. Just a dominating and a statement win from Stony Brook. We said 2 teams can make a statement with a win, and Stony Brook did.
Yes,
I know it's early, and I know that's a theme this week, but wow, what a win. Albany, the only undefeated team left in CA football, one of only 6 teams in FCS at 3-0 overall in the season. 45-28 over Holy Cross. Remember 2014? Albany started 4-0 that season, went 3-0 versus non-conference. A similar start, but it really, you can agree, it does look like a different team. I don't think this is the same 2014. Defensively, this team looks different. Offensively, I mean, a Biddy Token Hanks,
machine.
Absolute machine. 180-plus yards, 4 touchdowns. And of course, you can't overlook Villanova as well, a big win over Towson, 40-21. 5th straight conference opening victory for the Wildcats. The most points scored for Villanova since November of 2014. Remember, I mean, last year's team was good. Didn't really set the bar offensively, but I don't know. It is interesting because you look at the standings and you're saying, wow, you know, it's early, and I know that, and I think you take things in small lumps as the season is this early on. But for me right now, looking at CA football, it's almost anyone's game right now. And I know it's only week 4, and I know it's crazy, but look up and down the standings right now. A lot of teams we don't know about, a lot of teams we're learning more about each week.
Well, guess what? It gets even more interesting this Saturday. Just 7 games set for Saturday. Once again, highlighted by 2 conference TV games by our TV partners, Comcast Sportsnet and the American Sports Network. At noon on ASN, Maine comes off a bye week to play host to number 11 JMU. Both squads are coming off losses to FBS opponents.
Maybe my favorite game of the week because of the intrigue, because of the unknown. Here comes Maine playing back-to-back FBS foes. We've talked about the difficult start. On and on, we've talked about playing 2 FBS teams. UConn and Toledo, of course, in both losses. Had an extra week, lying in the weeds, getting ready for James Madison. Probably watched that North Carolina game. JMU lost, as mentioned, to North Carolina for the first time. Up 21-14 after the first quarter, got away in the second half, 56-28. I mean, it's interesting because you look at the stats. What do you count? Because Maine has played 2 FBS opponents. JMU has played 2 non-conference FCS games against teams who statistically haven't been great. That North Carolina loss, do you count that too? So what stats do you trust? JMU leads CA in rushing, 339 yards per game, 16 total touchdowns. I mean, Johnson and Abdullah just keep feeding on the rock. 4 touchdowns each, both average well over 80 yards a game. Maine's rush defense has allowed 190-plus yards per game, but 2 physical FBS teams. So how does that account? You expect JMU to want to set the tone with the rush as they have all season long. Just not sure who has the advantage. I mean, JMU's first trip to Orono since 2012. These teams don't play every year. 2012 was also the last time JMU, ironically, won a conference opener on the road. So the last 2 tries, JMU has not won a conference opener on the road. Maine's first home game under Joe Harrisimiak, and we mentioned that 3rd week, a young coach. I'm interested to see how the Black Bears respond because we knew about the start. We knew this game was coming up. I really don't know what to expect. That's why I think this is the most fun game of the week. And I don't know what to expect. Stat-wise, throw everything out. I'm really excited to see because we don't know what's going to happen.
It should be exciting indeed. On Comcast Sportsnet Saturday night at 7, Elon travels to William & Mary. Both the Phoenix and Tribe ended non-conference play with wins this past Saturday.
You do take that as a positive for both teams. Elon, I mean, hats off to Elon. And I know it sounds corny and it sounds simple saying, well, good for Elon, they got to win, but it is. Sometimes that can change momentum. Sometimes that can change seasons. Will it? We don't know. But 26-3 over Fayetteville State at home. Scrossi talked a lot about in the postgame validation for the hard work put in. You have to give the players credit and the program credit for just getting a win. John Gallagher, shout out to you, 4 field goals in that game in the 26-3 win. On the other side, William & Mary opened up the newly renovated Zabel Stadium, a 35-10 win. First quarter, a little bit of a slow start, but the rush game came into life. Kendall Anderson has kind of been absent these first 2 games, but 277 rush yards, all 5 touchdowns on the ground. Still banged up. We're not sure about Kendall Anderson this week. We think we might see him a little bit more. But Albert Funderburk, 3 touchdowns rushing. Jonathan Dunn also had a career game. Both of them combined for 226 yards. Coming in, Elon allows 220 rush yards per game, so I think I'm going to expect the Tribe, kind of like they have all year, to set the tone on the ground. Steve Cluley in the pass game, I think, is still trying to develop, still trying to find some chemistry. 3 touchdowns for Cluley, 4 interceptions. I know it's early, but that's a little bit of something where Wayne Mary probably can admit to you, too, that they need to work on that pass game just a little bit. Tribe is at New Hampshire, then at JMU. Elon has Nova, New Hampshire, and Richmond. Bottom line, both teams are looking to please get a win this week because the path doesn't get any easier after this one.
Yep. On Saturday, New Hampshire opens its conference season on the road at Rhode Island. Same theme going on with each team looking to bounce back from tough road losses to Ivy League schools last week.
And no disrespect to the Ivy, but that's something that we're not really accustomed to. We're seeing 2 CAA teams trying to reel and come back off back-to-back losses against Ivy League foes. Rhode comes back home after that Friday loss. That was a Friday ASN game. Wes McCoy didn't really play. The offense struggled a little bit and got behind early. Harvard had a bunch of yards on offense. Paul Mraz is now named the starter under center. A little bit. I think he's going to give them a little bit more of a pace on offense, a little bit more of a flow. New Hampshire, I mean, uncharacteristic end in that New Hampshire-Dartmouth game. Up 21-7 in the fourth. Not the prettiest contest, but you think they're going to pull it out. Dartmouth comes back, scores 2 touchdowns, a field goal and a touchdown late, and wins the game. An absolute surprising loss for New Hampshire because historically, in those non-conference games, New Hampshire has got it done. So, I don't know. This is an interesting game because it's New Hampshire's earliest game of the season so far. They've played 3 straight 7 o'clock plus late-night games. Rhode Island's coming back home. Both teams allow over 450 yards per game on defense. Last 2 CAA teams in pass defense, last 2 CAA teams in total defense. At the same time, I think both of these offenses coming into 2016 expected to... They knew they were going to be young, and they knew they might have some, but they expected to have a little bit more progress at this point in the season so far. Something to keep an eye on. I mean, UNH has 1 touchdown in the first quarter this season. Rhode still hasn't scored a touchdown in the first quarter. Offensively, this is a game to keep an eye on because you want to see what these teams are going to do. You really have nothing to lose. Last year, remember, Rhode went up at New Hampshire 17-0 at the half. UNH in that game and used that game as a turnaround point for the season to eventually go on and reach the playoffs. Something has to give in this one, especially on offense for these teams. Interesting that, like I did say, New Hampshire's early start, I think Rhode has a slight advantage for that playing at home. But again, offensively, you have to set the bar with something for both of these teams.
Like you said, that's an early afternoon game starting at 1 o'clock. 4 more non-conference games close out Week 4 beginning at 3:30 on Comcast Sportsnet with Richmond hosting Colgate at home. This is the only non-conference game featuring 2 playoff teams from 2015. Should be a good one.
I know. We talked about this earlier in the season. Kudos to both of these programs for scheduling this game because, of course, you don't know if the other teams are going to make the playoffs and things of that nature, but it just worked out that way. Plain and simple from Danny Rocco last week's loss. Maybe my favorite quote of the week. We got out-coached today. We got out-played today. We got out-hit today. I mean, what else can you say? 42-14. Spiders totaled 32 rush yards on 20 attempts. I think that was a huge factor in that game. Couldn't really find a rhythm offensively. Lauletta tossed 411 yards, but he also threw 3 picks. We saw Richmond offensively really just struggling for the first time, really looked human for the first time in 2016. I know there's only 3 games, but still. That loss of Gordon Collins, we wondered if it would impact the Spiders, and so far it has. It's only been 1 contest without him, but that run game needs to find an identity, at least after trying to get through Stony Brook last week. 21-14 at half, and the kick return by Stony Brook returned for a touchdown, made it 28-14, really deflated Richmond. Here comes Colgate, 1-1 out of the gates, already had a bye week. Beat Yale at Yale, a place that is obviously very tough to play. Yale has a history, 144 years, of football history at Yale. 55-13, tied the worst loss for Yale all time at Yale. Jake Melville, quarterback, set 5 touchdowns, set a school record last week at Yale. James Holland at running back. Why do these names sound familiar? Maybe because Colgate really played impressively on the road in the playoffs last season, beat New Hampshire and James Madison. I think that's going to grab Richmond's attention. It probably has leading into the offseason as well. Also something to keep an eye on, Brian Brown needs 71 yards to become the all-time leading receiver at Richmond. I think it's a great opportunity for the Spiders to kind of get out of the national spotlight, get out of the top 5 and say, well, you guys are the preseason pick. Just come home, take care of business. You have a chance to get a big win, which by the end of the year, I think this could be a big win because Colgate, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion, predicted to win the Patriot League. So ultimately, this is a win that is not just going to be a non-conference win. It could be a big one at the end of the year.
On the flip side, Stony Brook hopes to build off its big win when the Seawolves host Sacred Heart at 6 o'clock. Stony Brook entered the national polls for the first time since 2013 on Monday.
And rightfully so. You got it done last week on offense. You got it done last week on defense.
Yes.
You got it done on special teams. Alston Jr. returned that kick that we talked about for the touchdown, a game changer in the second half to start that one. One of the more complete games, I think you could argue, that we've seen for Stony Brook in its entirety as a member of CAA football. 221 rushing yards, 34-plus minutes of possession. I think it was a really solid sign for the Seawolf faithful. QB Joe Carbone was efficient, not great, but 11 of 15. That's good in my book for 151 yards and 1 touchdown. Stony Brook held on to the ball on offense. Sacred Heart is 3-0 on the year, played 3 straight Pioneer League teams. Nothing against the Pioneer League teams. I just don't think the competition level is the same as Stony Brook. But isn't it funny, week to week, you talked about Stony Brook last week. Well, geez, the Richmond game's going to be tough. They lost 38-0 at an FBS vote. Isn't it amazing week to week? I mean, we're both guilty of it.
Yeah.
You just think differently of teams when they have standout performances like that. Chuck Priori comes back to me at Media Day. Learn that you're going to lose a few league games, but it's how you respond. That's one of his Media Day quotes. We saw them respond last week. In the past, I think Stony Brook with these non-conference games has struggled. I think it's going to be different this year. Sacred Heart at home, I think, is a great opportunity for Stony Brook to keep the train rolling.
Villanova moved to 2-1 with its win over Towson last weekend, and the nationally ranked Wildcats head to Lafayette for another 6 o'clock start.
Nova scored 26 first-half points in that win over Towson. Bednarczyk was 20 of 26 for 3 touchdowns, and the offense just had answers all day. Villanova's first passing touchdown since its win over Richmond at the end of last season came to Taurus Phillips. That says it all. I mean, Villanova's rushing attack has gotten it done, but the passing attack has slowly progressed. Taurus Phillips' first career touchdowns, had 2 of them. First career 100-yard game, 110 yards. And in that Towson, I mean, defensively, I was impressed with Villanova, but I was also impressed the amount of points that Villanova was able to put up. I didn't know that they could do that so early and so often against a good Towson team. Lafayette and Nova are playing for the first time since 1920, despite the proximity in the state of Pennsylvania. Lost at Princeton last week, lost to the Delaware the week before. Key for me is Javon White. He's really taking the load and being that go-to guy in the backfield. 5.0 yards per carry, 90.7 yards per game. I think that's the difference. The rushing attack in Nova, even though it's a road trip, even though it's another test for Nova, I think the rush game is going to be a difference for Nova to move up to 3-1.
For the second straight week, Albany closes out our show, and the number 22 Great Danes look to stay undefeated when they take on St. Francis at Bob Ford Field at 7 o'clock.
I know we've talked a lot about the Danes, and like we said, opened many eyes so far. I think this team has answered a lot of questions early. Did it again last weekend versus Holy Cross, 45-28 win. Ibitic and Hanks, I mean, 3+ 100-yard games. He's the FCS leader right now with 8 rushing touchdowns. I mean, 180-plus yards in that win, and it seems like whenever he's going, this Albany offense is moving too. Speaking of that, as I transition over there, the passing game, I mean, it's starting to feed off that. You see Z Robertson kind of taking over that option as the number 1 receiver. Nevin Sussman looked a lot more comfortable last week offensively. Albany has won 3 games all of last year. Let's remember that. 3 games all of last year. They're already off to a 3-0 start. A lot of that, too, is credited to a +10 turnover margin. Number 1 scoring defense in CAA. 17.0 points per game. St. Francis, it's his 4th straight road game. A very, very good offensive team, though. They've played Montana, played Towson well a couple weeks ago. Towson learned that the hard way, had to come back. Despite the 1-2 record, they beat Columbia last week, I think perhaps this is the best offensive team so far that Albany has had to play. How do you handle the hype? Do you believe the hype? Do you not believe that? How do you handle it? That's Albany. You come back home because the next 3 CAA games are tough and are going to prove just how good Albany is, Richmond, Maine, and Nova. But how do you handle the hype coming against a St. Francis team that's going to put up a lot of numbers offensively? I think that's what I'm looking forward to from Albany.
They will need that momentum indeed heading into the conference season. All the links you need for Week 4 can be found at cafootball.com. That includes live streams, live stats, and more. You can also find television clearance information for games being broadcast in your area.
CAA football is hip, as the kids say nowadays. And by hip, I mean we have all the social platforms out there. We got Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search CAA football and use our hashtag CAAFB.
You and Mike will try to take that hip as you travel north again this weekend as part of CAA Football's on-campus coverage at Rhode Island. Stay with cafootball.com and all those social media platforms Tim just spoke about for highlights and behind-the-scenes action from Kingston. And make sure to tune in next Thursday for CAA Football's Going Deep feature on the Rams.
I know we had a lot of really great feedback from the CAA Football fans, from the community for our first on-campus feature. And I know Mike and I are really looking forward to being able to tell a little bit of a different story this week from Rhode. be on the lookout for us. If you're there on Saturday, we'll be there all weekend. Again, like you said, through social, follow us on there as well if you'd like to get some behind-the-scenes stuff.
That's all I got. Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the game Saturday.